Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yeah. So the first time I got to know that we were going to do a podcast with you, I started doing some research and I obviously landed on your Instagram page. And I must say, I really fell in love with your renders, these unique retro modern Japanese cars,
Oh,
this
thanks.
Photoshop renderings, and this unique composition style. So my first question to you is, how does one discover your own style?
Yeah, discovering your own style. So, for me, I guess it was a long time ago. Probably it's one of those typical stories of a child growing up, and I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and for some mysterious reason, I don't know why, but I love cars, even though nobody in my family were so interested in cars or even art and drawing. But somehow I was just mysteriously drawn to those two aspects. So I grew up as a child in Hong Kong, and I think surrounding me were, in the city, there were lots of interesting cars, and that's probably where I grew to love Japanese cars. At that time, back in the 80s, Japanese cars were the most high tech in their image, and they looked futuristic, and I was drawn to them. But I liked all sorts of cars at the time, not only cars, but buses, trains, whatever. All kinds of transportation. And then I enjoyed drawing, so I think as a kid I kind of learned by just mimicking. So I would start by taking magazine photos, tracing over them, and learning simply how to draw a car. From I think the very, very first car, when I was in first grade, I think it was in a magazine, there was a double page of a Mercedes 190E, and I traced it. And I think that was kind of the beginning of learning. And then after some point, maybe around 8 or 9 years old, I started trying to create my own cars. And that's probably still juggling learning to draw and creating at the same time. So obviously they weren't very good, but it was probably taking bits of existing cars and putting them together. Yeah, so I think it's a very maybe typical journey of learning, and I think in the past, before all these softwares and all these tools that can help us so much, back then you can only draw. You have a pen and a paper, and that's it. So it's free entertainment. So I think I learned rather quickly by myself, but it only gets to a certain point. One cannot work in a vacuum. So I think as a child, just learning by myself reached only so far. And then I was, typically, as a car designer, everybody has that story where they're in elementary school or primary school, and they're in the class doodling cars, and the teacher would yell at them, what are you doing? You should pay attention to class, Then throughout, I think I never gave up this hobby, and I would also build model cars, and then when I was about 10 years old or so, this is the time my family and I, we moved from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, and then it was a whole world of new things to see, like American cars, trucks, and just so happened we lived in a suburb of LA, and that was near one of the best car design schools, Art Center College of Design. But of course, back then there was no internet, and as a kid, I didn't know what it was. And one day, the school was featured in the news. I was watching the news, and they were showing there was a Luigi Colani exhibition at the school. And I didn't know what any of this was. I was watching the news with my dad, and I said, "Wow, what is this? It's in Pasadena. Can you take me there to see this?" And then, so that was 10 years old. And I visited the school, and I knew, wow, you could design cars for a living, not just a hobby. So I had my mind set on that. So probably a long story to say how to develop own style, but eventually in high school, I attended some classes at Art Center, which were made for high school students to teach some basics of drawing, and that was really eye-opening. Having an instructor who was an automotive designer, and then meeting other classmates who were, similar to myself, who love car, love to draw. I never met anyone like this in my regular high school. So that's probably when I really started to understand, drawing to a deeper level and designing. So, that's, I guess, a long answer to a very short question, but then from there on, it progresses.
Okay. So, do you still have that old sketches and all?
Yeah, I still keep some of the childhood
nice.
drawings around. I think
I would love to see them.
Sometimes.
That's good. Okay, so does you have lived in different places, right? So does geography influence your design approach? So you have, as you said, you have lived in Hong Kong, US, and now in Japan as well. So does living in different places influence your design approach or your art style, maybe?
Yeah, I think it influenced both the maybe design approach in the sense that I think for anyone to be able to move around in different parts of the world, and I was very privileged to be able to do that. I think it was not easy, but in retrospect, as a kid moving between countries is not easy. But looking back, it probably teaches the person to have more of an open mind and a more diverse range of tastes, and to understand, from Asia to America, very different mindset and taste. And I think one thing that probably helped myself a lot is kind of learning the best aspects of each culture, both learning to adapt to it and learning from it. I think from growing up in Asia, that probably trains your work ethics, your sense of just the brutal hard work. Not that we don't do it in America, but I think in elementary school in Hong Kong was like boot camp almost. It's all about homework. I think the word fun does not exist. And then, whereas I think it was a big contrast because I was in 4th grade, moving from Hong Kong to LA, and immediately the day I set foot in the classroom in the US, wow, what a world of difference. The kids were playing, they were talking back to the teacher, that's unheard of where I grew up. So I think the best part is, there's a certain freedom of everybody offering their own opinion. Everyone's very open to new ideas. And I think to be able to take maybe some of that work ethic, that super intense hard work, and combining with then growing up in the second half of my childhood in a Western country, to be able to think more freely and something to learn from each place.
So basically, like combining hard work and that's where you grew your skill set, and that afterwards you get that design thinking approach going on, where you get the freedom to work. So you basically combine them both. That's good.
Yeah. Little did I know at the time, when you make big moves in your life, especially as a kid, it's maybe traumatic or difficult. But now in retrospect, looking back on, I'm so thankful it happened, because now in my day-to-day work, all of these things that different places have taught me growing up are now put to use.
So can you give an example? Like, for example, if you take Japanese culture, and if you could explain us, how does Japanese culture, influences Japanese car design culture?
Yeah, I think maybe a very obvious thing, you take the whole tradition of Japanese design, and we do use a lot of influences, inevitably, even though we kind of work in an international, global collaboration type of thing. We have studios all over the world, but I think everyone's very mindful that Nissan, because it's a Japanese company, so we always look for those kinds of inspiration. And it means different things to different people. I can see, some designers are taking hints from traditional Japanese culture with the very intricate, delicate type of sense of graphics. And in my mind, I'm probably more influenced by when I was growing up in the 80s, what Japan meant. It was the most high-tech country, and the cars were the most high-tech, and they had the technology, and they looked the part. And I think that really influenced myself and the other colleagues at work, that we always aim to keep that spirit alive of offering that sense of technology, not only actual tech, but looking the part.
That's great. So I want to take this to a different direction. So I want to know about more about yourself, your personal experiences. So you have been a designer and a design manager as well. So being a designer and a manager is a different skill set. So what was that transition like when you started off as a designer and then you transitioned into being a manager? What was that like?
Yeah, I think this is something, maybe if you had asked me that 10 years ago, and before becoming a manager, actually maybe a little bit longer now, more like 12 years. I think a lot of designers don't really necessarily want to be managers, I think, per se, like because most designers are more free spirit, want to create and do creative work. We love to draw, make models, and so I think earlier in when I started working, I never thought so far. Never thought, oh, one day I'm going to be a manager. I just wanted to design a car. That's the goal. Is have a sketch be selected, have a model be made, and then the car going through production phase, and then coming out on the road, and I could see it driving. That was the dream.
Yeah.
Never really thought, oh, yeah, I dreamt of being a manager. But then, as time progressed, I think in the I'm trying to think back what year it was, but I think the first time let me think back, what's a good way to analogy? I think, I went through several cycles of this, like doing sketches and then doing model, and then eventually a car does come out. Okay, so that is very fulfilling. And then, then what? What? Then you start to kind of maybe want to learn more, and I think we as designers, we are never satisfied at where we are. We always want to challenge more and do more new things. And I think that includes even moving to different places, or some people move companies, but of course you want to grow. So I think it's a very natural thing that kind of happens as you get more and more experience and deeper into the process of the projects. I think naturally one tends to start to manage, and I think I think in a lot of cases, I think before a person becomes a manager, they were already managing a project, and then maybe managing people already unofficially, or mentoring younger designers. So I think that role actually came about quite naturally, and it wasn't as a kind of on-off switch. So I thought that one day I find myself doing management type of work, and then suddenly the company made me a manager. So I think that's how I recall it happening.
That's good. You mentioned a very interesting thing there. So as a young designer, you always want, you just want that sketch to be selected, that model to be, you want to see that that design, or that the idea that you have created on the road. So when you first saw that thing, first saw your ideation, or first saw your your concept on the road, what was that feeling like?
Yeah, it's kind of like meeting your hero. Sometimes it's not it's a mix of good and bad, right? And I think when I was a student, or when I was a young designer, I remember asking the more senior designers about this. How does it feel to have a car on the road? And often it's the answer is kind of mixed. They say, sometimes they would say, I don't want to see it because it reminds me of all the headaches and nightmares we went through in the project. Okay. And then I find that it's actually very true. Of course, it's a great feeling, because especially when you see the car being unveiled at an auto show, or it's the biggest satisfaction you can have as a designer. Then at the same time, it is true. Once the car comes out, I remember always checking the blogs, and the forums to see what are people saying, and then for every positive comment, it's like then every negative comment, it really hurts, right? When they talk about the design, and then and it's true. It's great to see the car, and I think both of the cars that I did as exterior designer, where my sketch was selected and eventually led to production, both of them, my dad actually had bought those cars, and one was a Nissan Murano and one's an Altima. So it's great to see it. But then when you start, when I get in it and I drive it, yes, it does bring back memories. I struggled. This was very difficult. This was a nightmare. So it's a mix of feelings.
That's true. So let's just make it easier for the listeners. If you could just, people have that idea of basically a basic idea of what a design director does in a company. If you could just explain what is the role of a design director, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm going to generalize a bit because I imagine at the different companies, the design directors generally do similar things, but of course, depending on the individual, depending on a company, depending on the personality of the design director and the way he works, it could turn out to be quite different. But I'll simply explain from my perspective that in my role, maybe I will start explaining this from what does a designer do? So a designer, gets a brief from his manager or director, and they make the sketches and then do the design competition, and I guess maybe not so much sketches anymore. It's more directly 3D these days. I'm still stuck in old school, but then as you move to the next role, and I think I talked earlier about facing new challenges, and when you become, say, a design manager, which is the next step, from a designer. So you start to manage the team, which is one aspect, but you manage the project itself. Sometimes maybe including the resources, the manpower, the budget, and you also start to interface with other departments. And I think naturally, the one that us designers interface with the most is engineering. I think as a designer, you do that already. And then when you become manager, you kind of go a bit deeper into the other departments of the company, including product planning, and then the program management team, which is controlling the budget, and you start having even negotiating the budget and the spec of the vehicle. So there's a lot more, not only managing the team, but managing the program and the wider aspect. And then to design director, that's simply zooming out even more of a bird's eye perspective. Then you're managing not only one project or two projects within a small team, but then you manage a whole department or a segment of vehicles. And there are multiple teams, and then so you really need to kind of zoom out and have a bigger perspective of what is the brand, the lineup strategy, not focus on only one car anymore. How the products relate to each other. What's the direction where the company wants to go with the designs. And then also there is maybe everything zoom out, so even including managing the studio itself with the people, the resources. Now it's more about, even taking care of a bigger scope of HR responsibilities, including hiring and, who is going on foreign assignments, these type of things. So I think it's a natural, with each step in the company, you add a little bit to your task and you zoom out a little bit more to get a bigger perspective.
That was explained very nicely.
Oh, thanks.
So what do you think are the skills that are needed to be, let's say, in the topmost hierarchy of design?
Topmost, so you mean like a head of design?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm not there, so I can only try to, from my own observations, make some guesses of what are, and now, I work relatively close to the head of design in our company, and I see the day to day. It's a tough job. First of all, I'm gonna say, there is a lot of demands from the company, and when you're the head of design, you're responsible ultimately for delivering a successful design. There's no one else to turn to blame or to lean on. So you are responsible, and you're responsible for your team of however in a big OEM there's hundreds of people in the global studios. So basically, I think as in any kind of management role, I would say that it's not so much having more and more privilege and having more and more power. I think it's simply having more and more responsibility. And when you're the head of the organization, you're ultimately responsible. So I think what type of qualities you need everything. I think the combination of design vision to be able to really, really zoom out and see a big picture, to understand where the world is going, where you need to steer the ship in your company's design direction. And so that's kind of the left brain, right brain portion, the conceptual, very conceptual thinking. But at the same time, you need to be able to zoom in because you see the car all the way through to production. So to understand, how a car is built, every little detail and perceived quality, and so there's a very wide aspect in the vehicle design, from big picture direction to taking care of the last bit of detail until a car begins production. And then, so that's the car design aspect. And then on the other end, then you have taking care of the studio, your people, and then dealing with the corporate side of things, juggling the needs of the corporation, which in itself is another huge task. So yeah, it's got, the maybe one of the most important qualities is to be flexible. I think this is something I find more and more, as I'm learning myself too in my job. Simply having flexibility and adapting to changing conditions, that's one of the keys to leading.
And how much do you think connections matter if you want to go up in the hierarchy?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting connections, maybe in a very, when we say connections, probably what comes to mind is, yes, getting to know lots of people and making yourself known in the industry, which is all well and good, I think. Then I think on a deeper level, the day-to-day connections, whether it is you're a student and you work with your classmates and your teachers, or you're in a company and you work with your colleagues and bosses, simply everyone matters. I think I have seen, there are some instances where, and this is not only in the field of design, this is just in general in a company where there are individuals who are, they treat the people who are in charge or above them very differently than those who are, whether they're same level or even below them. There's two different phases. And I think that is probably one of the most dangerous things, because it's a small industry and kind of what comes around goes around. And I have witnessed, numerous times where the hierarchy changes. And so it's so important, in terms of connections, not particularly to go out of your way to be not genuinely, nice to everyone, that type of, or fake, for that matter. But I think just being genuine and just, being honest and doing working hard and always trying to do your best. And in my mind, and treat everyone with respect. And I think in general, these kind of basic principles just will go a long way, because at the end of the day, that's what fundamentally will matter.
Yeah. So, as I was reading in one of your interviews, you said there are, interdisciplinary, inter-studio competitions for a certain project that comes. So, how do you pick out people for the particular certain project?
Yeah, that's also, it varies a lot, case by case. But it depends on the project and the type of car. Because in Nissan, we have such a wide range of products, and some are very global products that sell around the world, and some are very regional specific. So depending on the type of project, sometimes it's a very region specific project. If this is a truck for North America, then of course, then the main studio in charge of doing it would be the U.S., our California studio, for example. And but more often than not, the products are global, and it needs to satisfy the needs of many markets. And generally, when we start, we do a global design competition between all of the studios. So, for example, for us, we have California, London, Shanghai, and of course our headquarters in Japan. So the designers all join in, and people compete locally within their studios first, to be the winning design in their studio, and then towards what we call a final, we call it go with one type of selection, where the CEO comes in and selects the final design. That could be a competition between 3 global studios. So it's like a reality TV show, very exciting for.
Okay. So, So, I want to talk about that one project. So, in the course of your time, you have done different projects from the start of your career. According to you, what was that one project that you did that you particularly find out that was really groundbreaking, or you thought that it's going to make revolution in the automotive industry, and it actually did?
Oh, that's a big question. Groundbreaking and the revolution in the industry. Maybe I wouldn't go that far in my case. Maybe I look back and I worked on a lot of very maybe mass market type of vehicles that has to satisfy lots of customers. So maybe I'll talk from the point of view, maybe the projects that are more meaningful to myself. And probably, as I explained, we go through this kind of competition phase where designers try to win the project. And it actually took me quite a while. I after joining Nissan, it took almost 8 years or so. I would always get to the phase where they narrow down to 2 models, and then I would lose out to the final winner. You keep trying and trying. So this is another, maybe to the designers who are going through the same thing, don't give up. One day you'll get your car picked. And so for me, it was the 3rd generation Nissan Murano that was actually my maybe first project where it's a complete exterior design. That I was the designer. Of course, a big team of people worked on it, so I cannot say it's my own, but it was my design that was selected at that final milestone. And so it's very meaningful to me personally, and also at the same time, I think it was, the car came out in 2015, so that was a while ago. So today we look back, okay, this is just another crossover with the very current kind of styling cues. But at the time, we were actually being quite bold with this design proposal, where it was at the time that these kind of very typical styling elements, like a floating roof or the very extreme type of headlamp and tail lamp signatures, they were not common at all. And so for us to be doing those things, and we were having fun with it in the San Diego studio. I was working on the Murano project, and and other designers are working on Maxima, and also there were Infinities at the time, and we were kind of pushing the boundaries on some of these kind of design cues, and I think in a way, quite special project to me, and then another one, which is probably something more recently that I really enjoyed, and this is actually a very specific vehicle for a specific market that we're designing, is the Nissan Patrol, and it was launched right before the pandemic. I think it was my last business trip to go on the launch of this vehicle to UAE, but the Nissan Patrol, the biggest market is the Middle East, and I think once you've worked on lots of projects, then it's not. It's of course about the design, about creating the object, but I find that more and more I'm more interested in learning new things, about people and about the world and different markets and cultures. And this was one that's tailored quite uniquely for for the Middle East market, where this vehicle is a big seller. And before working on that product, I don't know so much about that region of the world. I have not lived there. I have not traveled there. And, through the project itself, I was able to, travel, meet the people, understand some of the culture. Not to say I'm by no means an expert, but, to understand more and learn, and then take that knowledge and create a design with the team together. And we made a new Patrol that came out in it's a 2020 model year, and I was very happy because the customers, they appreciated it, and the sales went up quite a bit, and so yeah, that's another one where it's very memorable to me.
That's great. So how do you get that intuition or that that gut feeling that a certain project is going to work? Like, I'm sure experience matters a lot in that case, but is this like a skill set or something that young designers can learn earlier?
Yeah, that's a very tricky one. Is it learned, or is it something that you're born with, right? This type of intuition. I think I hesitate to say it's something you're only born with. I think it's kind of a combination. I think everybody is born with some intuition to some extent, and maybe someone has more than another person. But certainly there are many things that could be learned to help and to foster and nurture that. And I think in the creative process, I always remember Raymond Loewy with his quote, where you want to make something that's the most advanced but acceptable. So I think that kind of balance is what it is. So the intuition part, and every designer has their own sense of intuition and what they're inspired by. Very different for each person, but that part of the person is the dream part, where you reach for the skies and you dream about the future, and you create something that's never been done before. And then when you create something that's never been done before, usually there's a reason. Either it's unattractive, or once in a while we hit on that magic formula that it's never been done before, yet it looks amazing. It looks good. But I think the portion where you take something and simply make it attractive, and there is a fundamental human sense of what is attractive. We have an innate sense, when we see a bird, and we know an eagle is a fast bird, and an owl or a chicken is a slow bird. Somehow within us we have sense of intuition to judge, what is attractive looking and what is not. And I think those could be learned. I think design school, when you're placed with different peers and other designers, you start to pick these things up. That's, at least for me, that's when I, and start to pick up a sense of, okay, this is not good. Don't do it, because nobody will ever like it. But, so it's kind of a fine balance between innovating, but knowing what looks good or not. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's no exact science.
No, I get it. In the video that I guess you were explaining the new Murano, uh, I noticed that you tend to focus a lot on small details, and a keen sense of observation is very important for designers. So how can one enhance that or practice that?
Wow. Okay, that's also a loaded question. I think also quite many different ways to do it, and it's interesting. I actually never have thought about so much, noticing details versus the bigger picture or the volumes or the proportions of a car. Like in my mind, it probably starts with the big proportions and gestures and volumes of a car, and then you zoom in down to the details. But in a way, holistically, it's all important. People read it together, and how does a person develop that sense, to be able to see something holistically? I'm not sure. Everybody is different, and in my own case, I can only maybe talk about an example. So maybe in my own case, actually maybe back to the whole moving between countries thing again. Living in a big city when I was little, like in Hong Kong, where spaces are dense, much like Tokyo here. People tend to notice the details. So when especially Japanese car design of the 80s, as I was growing up, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, they're all actually quite similar. The silhouettes and the form language are all kind of boxy with flat-looking surfaces, but the details are so unique. The graphics of I always remember like the C-pillar graphics, even the cars that have quarter windows, they would frame it differently, and the headlamp, tail lamp graphics, with the skylines with the very iconic circular rings, and then you have, the different companies really, play with their graphics, and I think, as a young child growing up in a kind of densely populated city, that is what I noticed. But then the contrast of moving to America, then, you ride in a car on the freeway, and you see cars from afar, and you notice their gestures, and then in the American car design at the time, then I noticed, wow, okay, maybe the details are not as important, but the overall, the silhouette of the car, there's a big variety of that, and designers are more focused on that. So I think that you kind of depends on where you are. So I guess it's very important to see the world, go to different places, because you have different perspective of seeing things. And I think I've read an article of a car designer who grew up in New York, and he lived in a high rise, and he always looked down on the cars, and you see the plan view of the car, and that's also a rare perspective. No one designs with a plan view, but I think so. That's why probably important to just diversify your observations, to be in different places and see different things.
So we were talking about the earlier times, right?
Technology.
So there was less technology, no softwares as such, that everything was done by hand. So can you tell us a bit about that era? How was things done earlier?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic to me, because the world is changing so fast. The technologies are changing. We're going through another phase of changing, going from probably 2D sketching to directly to 3D and in the virtual world. And the last time things went through this type of shift was probably when I was a car design student, and then also starting work. Yeah, in the turn of the millennium, that was probably the late 90s, was a big shift to digital. So I think in Art Center, I was the second term of students to get an email address. So back then it was still, we still use a dial-up. Okay, that's really old stuff. Won't go into that. But anyway, so internet was kind of new when I was in school. And yeah, not so much digital too, especially when I first started Art Center. All we had was our pencils and pen and paper, and we used to shave these pastels into powder. And I don't know if any student does it anymore, but I started school without any digital, but it started to become more prevalent through my 4 years at art center. So towards my upper semesters, I was starting to do. I think at the time it was we were using the Silicon graphics machines and running Studio Paint. So that's probably a program that no one uses today, but back then it was actually popular, maybe before Photoshop gained popularity. So we had the sketch tablet, but it was still something very new, and of course, internet is not the way it is today, and digital presentation tools weren't really available. So even if you do digital drawings, to present them, you have to print them out as big posters, which cost way too much money, at the time. So it was still a bit not super common. In a class of maybe 12 students, perhaps there would be three or four people in their final presentation that would have some kind of digital work. But then it really took off, like in the kind of towards the end of the 90s and the beginning of 2000. So and then after I graduated, my first job was at Ford, and they were at the forefront of digital. So every designer used that program called Studio Paint, and you had a workstation and the big sketch tablet. So yeah, it was great. Once I started using that, and it was free, I could do as many printouts as I want at work for free. So then very quickly, we could give up the markers and the biggest difference, maybe we're a bit spoiled by the digital tools at the time, is you don't have to draw so perfectly. Your perspective can be wrong, and then you could kind of mess with it in the computer. Whereas before, when you make those big poster renderings, if you mess up, you have to throw it away, or you have to cut out a little part of that car and then redraw it somewhere else and carefully cut it and put it back on. It's much more, the speed is just much higher at that, at that time, when we went from manual drawing to digital. Just, you could crank out so many more ideas, and then, of course, then soon people learned you could grab pictures and parts of cars and start to morph them together and make them look super real. So it was kind of an exciting turning point around that time, where probably students today will take for granted, what's so special about Photoshop. But back then, we were discovering it. And much like, I think, the next phase now, going into the virtual world, is probably shifting again.
Yeah, that was great. I want to ask you about a pattern that I've noticed. So, young designers, I've seen that they are very ambitious, and they tend to switch from company to company for greater opportunities naturally. And I've seen people from older generation. They are a bit loyal, we can say, to a specific company. So, first of all, what do you think about that? And secondly, how do you think young designers should, progress in their careers?
Yeah, there's definitely no one way to do it. I think for each, depends on each personality and your background and what motivates you. But I think even back then, when I first joined the company in 1999, I was talking to the designers, and people tell me, the average that a designer spends in the company is 4 years. I don't know if it's changed now, but 20 years ago, it was 4 years and average. So, and it was a bit of I was in a big headquarters studio in Detroit, and you see a lot of newcomers joining, and every year there would be, people leaving, going on to other companies. So it's always been, I think, part of the game. And simply, maybe by nature, designers are a bit restless, always looking for something new to do. So if we don't find it in our current role, then it's quite natural people look for something else. Now, even for myself, I was working at Ford for about 4 years. Didn't quite reach 4 years. It was at the maybe 3.5 years. I was, in the studio working I was very happy there. Actually, I had no reason to leave the company, but, at that time, now this is a long time ago, it was 2003, 2003, there were a couple of very revolutionary vehicles from Nissan. One was the Murano, which was kind of the first super sleek crossover that's done in that way with the giant, big tires at the time. Today that's a very common proportion, but back then it was groundbreaking. And also the Infiniti FX, which is also, a very athletic crossover. So talking about now, it doesn't seem so special, but back then they were like these aliens or UFOs that landed. And then these two cars came out from Nissan, and it was brought into the design studio at Ford for benchmarking at the time. And as soon as I saw them, I was checking them out, and I thought, wow, this company is really exciting. Why not apply and go there? And so yeah, within a couple months, and I was working at Nissan. So I think it wasn't so much a planned change. I think a lot of times these things happen because we are sometimes impulsive, and we're driven by we think with our hearts rather than with our brain. So sometimes naturally a designer simply goes somewhere because something exciting is happening. And then even surprisingly to myself, I've been with Nissan for since 2003, and I think the company has been very kind to me, sending me to different locations around the world. So I think I've actually, during my time at Nissan so far, I've moved almost every 3 years or so to a different studio. So I think maybe not so much a longing to change companies necessarily, but So I think Nissan has been sending me to different locations on an average of every 3 or 4 years to the different studios around the world. So it's kept things very exciting. Every time you go to a new place, you get re-inspired, re-energized. So I mean, it's case by case, but I would say a lot of designers, seek out the kind of change of environment or change of their role or their job, something. Most designers are probably not don't enjoy as much doing the exact same task over and over for years and years, sitting at the same desk. It's very rare, but that also happens, and there are guys who find success that way too. So I mean, it kind of varies case by case, I think.
That was great. So, lastly, I want to know about some recommendations that you can give. It can be anything. It can be a podcast. It can be a Instagram page as well. It can be a book recommendation. Where do you gain your knowledge from, or you get inspired from?
Ooh, let me see. I don't actually sit down and think about that. It's kind of you almost get a sensory overload these days, but wow, if I have to pinpoint something, I quite enjoy Instagram. I wonder if it's already passé or not, but it's as you know, I'm actually quite active on it. I like to make sketches myself on weekends and post for fun as well. But I love seeing this kind of free, open forum where from students to designers to design directors, everybody's on there and sharing something, and I can really see the way the designers are evolving. From I think in the past I would see more sketches. People are posting sketches, but now people are making great animations, and and I wonder what's next. But it's a great source to kind of keep up to date and just get inspired.
A lot of people take it as a negative thing because they're a bit scared that their work will get stolen or something like that. But there's a lot of positive side to it as well, right? As you said, it is a very open platform. You can get inspired. You can get inspired from different sketches, renders that you see all over the country. People are posting from. So it is a very positive thing if you see it like that.
Yeah, that's probably a very good point. Some may be worried that wow, their work may get copied, and I think that could happen whether people do it intentionally, which is probably that's obviously wrong. But then there are
Yeah.
also people doing it unintentionally, meaning we learn from osmosis, and sometimes shapes we see subconsciously start to
Mhm.
come out. It's actually a very challenging world to be designing in now. Like lots of things to inspire us, but also lots of things to watch out for and be careful. So I think we're continuously learning, how to use these new tools, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Understood. Yeah, sir. So that was it. That was the podcast. I really enjoyed it, and I got to
Cool.
learn a lot from you. And I hope we can get back you to the podcast sometime else also.
Cool. All right. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.